What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. So today we're diving into something I've been meaning to talk about for a while, Ghost of Tsushima in 2025. And I know what you're thinking. Dude, this game came out like 5 years ago. Why are we talking about it now? Well, here's the thing. With the PC release last year and all the hype around potential sequels, I thought it was the perfect time to revisit this absolute masterpiece and see how it holds up. Plus, let's be honest, not everyone jumped on this when it first dropped on PlayStation, and now that it's on PC, there's a whole new audience discovering what might be the best samurai game ever made. So whether you're a longtime fan or someone who's been on the fence about picking this up, stick around because we're going to break down everything that makes this game special. And hey, before we dive in, if you're enjoying the content, smash that like button and consider subscribing. It really helps out the channel, and I've got some exciting content coming up that you won't want to miss.
So let's start with the obvious question. What is Ghost of Tsushima? At its core, it's an open-world action-adventure game set during Mongol invasion of Japan in 1274. You play as Jin Sakai, a samurai who survives the brutal massacre at Komodo Beach and has to completely rethink everything he knows about honor, warfare, and what it means to protect his people. But here's where it gets interesting. This isn't just another kill the bad guys and save the world story. Jin's journey is fundamentally about identity crisis. He's caught between the rigid samurai code he was raised with, face your enemies head on, fight with honor, and never attack from the shadows, and the brutal reality that these traditional methods are getting people killed. The Mongols don't play by samurai rules, so Jin has to become something his culture considers dishonorable, the ghost. What I love about this setup is that it creates this constant internal tension. Every time you choose stealth over direct combat, every time you use poison or throw a smoke bomb, you're not just making a gameplay choice. You're making a narrative choice about who Jin is becoming. The game literally calls these tactics dishonorable, but they're often the most effective way to save lives. And this isn't just surface-level storytelling either. The game explores themes of cultural identity, the cost of war, and what happens when your moral framework can't handle the reality you're facing. It's heavy stuff wrapped in absolutely gorgeous gameplay.
Now let's talk about something everyone notices immediately. This game is absolutely stunning, but it's not stunning in that hyper-realistic, every pore on your face is visible way that some games go for. Instead, Ghost of Tsushima embraces what I can only describe as painting come to life. The art direction here is incredible. You've got these massive fields of pampas grass swaying in the wind, bright red maple leaves dancing through the air, thick fog rolling over mountaintops. It literally feels like you're playing through a Japanese painting. And the best part? The game trusts you enough to not clutter up this beautiful world with a million UI elements. Speaking of which, the Turrisala mode. Look, I know some people think it's just a gimmick, but I actually think it's pretty cool. Yeah, it's basically a black and white filter with some film grain effects, but when you combine it with the Japanese voice acting and subtitles, it creates this really immersive experience that feels like you're watching a classic samurai film. Is it perfect? No. Does it capture everything about Kurosawa's filmmaking? Definitely not. But as an optional way to experience the game, I think it's a nice touch. The lighting system deserves special mention too. Those golden hour sunsets, the way light filters through fog, the dramatic lighting during duels, it all works together to create these cinematic moments that just stick with you.
All right, let's get into the meat and potatoes, the combat system. And honestly, this is where Ghost of Tsushima really shines. The developers struck this perfect balance between being accessible to newcomers, but having enough depth to keep you engaged for dozens of hours. The core of the combat revolves around 4 different stances: stone, water, wind, and moon. Each stance is specifically designed to counter different enemy types. Stone stance wrecks swordsmen, water stance flows around shield bearers, wind stance deals with spearmen, and moon stance handles the big brute enemies. But here's what makes it brilliant. You're not locked into these matchups. Sure, water stance is most effective against shields, but you can use those flowing combo attacks against any enemy type. The stances give you clear strategies to start with, but mastery comes from learning when and how to break the rules. It's like the game is teaching you to think like Jin. Start with the traditional samurai approach, then adapt and improvise as needed. The standoff system is another stroke of genius. You can challenge enemies to these one-on-one duels where timing is everything. Get the timing right, and you can take out multiple enemies in these incredibly satisfying sequences. Get it wrong, and you're in for a tough fight. It perfectly captures that classic samurai movie tension. And then there's the ghost tools. Smoke bombs, kunai, sticky bombs, those hallucination darts that make enemies fight each other. The game constantly reminds you that these are dishonorable tactics, but man, they're fun to use. There's this great moment where you realize you're having way more fun playing as the ghost than as a traditional samurai, which perfectly mirrors Jin's character arc.
Let's dive deeper into the story, because I think this is where Ghost of Tsushima really surprised me. On the surface, it seems pretty straightforward. Bad guys invade, good guy fights back. But the more you dig into it, the more complex it becomes. Jin's character arc is incredibly well done. He starts as this traditional samurai who believes in honor above all else. But as the game progresses, you watch him slowly compromise his beliefs, one small step at a time. First, maybe he uses stealth to avoid unnecessary casualties. Then he starts using poison. Eventually, he's assassinating people in their sleep and using psychological warfare. The brilliant thing is that the game never tells you whether Jin is right or wrong. His uncle, Lord Shimura, represents the old way, the honorable way, and he genuinely believes that Jin is losing his humanity by becoming the ghost. And you know what? He might have a point. There are real consequences to Jin's choices, both for himself and for the people around him. The supporting cast is fantastic too. Characters like Yuna, Masako, Ishikawa, and Norio all have their own compelling storylines that intersect with Jin's journey in meaningful ways. These aren't just quest dispensers, they're fully realized characters dealing with their own trauma and moral dilemmas. One of my favorite aspects is how the game handles the concept of honor itself. In a lot of Western media, honor is presented as this universally good thing, but Ghost of Tsushima shows how rigid adherence to honor codes can actually be harmful. Sometimes the honorable choice gets people killed. Sometimes survival requires you to be dishonorable. The ending choices really drive this home. Without spoiling anything, let's just say that Jin has to make some incredibly difficult decisions about family, duty, and what kind of person he wants to be.
Now let's talk about how this game actually runs, especially on PC. The port work done by Nixxes is honestly incredible. Even on older hardware, this game looks and runs fantastic. I'm talking 4K resolution, high frame rates, full support for DLSS and FSR, all the bells and whistles you'd expect from a modern PC release. The director's cut adds some nice touches too. Japanese lip sync, which makes the Kurosawa mode experience even better, director commentary with the Japanese historian, which is fascinating if you're into the historical aspects, plus you get the Iki Island expansion and the Legends multiplayer mode included. Speaking of Iki Island, it's basically 10 to 12 hours of additional content that dives deeper into Jin's family history. It's more personal, more focused than the main campaign, and it introduces some interesting new mechanics and enemy types. If you're on the fence about the director's cut versus the base game, I definitely recommend going with the director's cut. The Legends mode is surprisingly robust too. It's a co-op multiplayer experience with its own mythology-inspired storylines. 4 different classes, survival modes, raid content. It's basically a whole separate game built on top of the main experience. So the big question, how does Ghost of Tsushima hold up in 2025? And honestly, I think it's aged incredibly well. The art direction is timeless, the combat system still feels fresh and engaging, and the story themes are as relevant as ever. Sure, there are some areas where you can see its age. The open world structure, while innovative in some ways, still falls into some familiar patterns. Some of the side content can feel repetitive after a while, and yeah, the facial animations aren't quite up to today's standards. But here's the thing. The core experience is still fantastic. This is still the best samurai game ever made, in my opinion. The way it balances action, exploration, and storytelling is really impressive. And with all the technical improvements of the PC version, it honestly feels like a current-gen game. If you're someone who missed this the first time around, 2025 is actually a perfect time to jump in. You get the complete experience with all the DLC, the technical improvements, and you can play it however you want. Traditional, Samurai Honor, or sneaky ghost tactics.